Thank you for joining this live stream with Cisco Talos. Today, we are so pleased to share with you the launch of the first ever Talos Year in Review report, which is a monumental and collaborative effort within our team to tell the story of our work in the past year. It is definitely something that you will want to read. It features the expertise of a talented and diverse group of people, including reverse engineers, detection specialists, data scientists, linguists, managed hunt providers, incident responders, and threat intelligence analysts. They combed over everything that we observed in the threat landscape in 2022. And this data-driven story should give you an insight into Cisco's and the security community's most notable successes in 2022 and the remaining challenges heading into 2023. Now, the report was launched just a few hours ago, so to download your copy, head to blog.talosintelligence.com/year-in-review. The report is split into 4 sections, and for today's broadcast, we will be focusing on the first one. Now, this topic has dominated our operational efforts this year, and whilst we are tremendously proud of the results of these efforts, the work has also had a profound effect on our teams on a human level. I'm talking about our ongoing support for Ukraine following the invasion by Russia in February. So in this chat, we'll cover the top adversaries and threats that we have observed against Ukrainian organizations, the key behavior trends, the tactics, the techniques, and procedures. Plus, we'll give our prognosis on this specific threat landscape heading into 2023. Now, for this discussion, I am delighted to be joined by 3 people who have been closely involved in our work in Ukraine and have also been instrumental in pulling together the data for our Year in Review report. Now, but if you're watching us live, please do submit questions for our panelists throughout this chat. I'll be gathering those up and asking them for you on your behalf. So first up, we have Kendall McKay, Senior Intelligence Analyst for Cisco Talos, who has helped to lead the creation of this report. So welcome, Kendall. I wondered, first of all, could you talk about your role at Talos?
Hi, Hazel, absolutely. And it's great to be with you and my colleagues as we talk about this report, which we're just so excited about. As far as my role within Talos, I'm part of the strategic analysis team within Talos's threat intelligence and interdiction group. So a lot of my work involves long-term threat actor tracking, identifying trends and changes in the threat landscape, and providing analytic oversight to many of our high priority projects.
Fantastic. And I don't know if you had a chance to sleep much over the last few months. I know you've been leading the charge on this report. Would you be able to give our audience an overview of what is included in this end of year review?
Absolutely. As you mentioned, it's an incredible report based on the scope and also just the sheer volume of data and expertise that we leverage to create it. And so the report is divided into a couple different sections, as you mentioned. The first section looks at major events. So these are events that Talos was very involved in throughout the year and were highly impactful to both Talos, Cisco customers, as well as entities globally. And so those 2 topics are Log4j and, of course, Ukraine, which we'll be talking about more today. And so with those 2 topics, we sort of look back at our work throughout the year, but also provide some updates and have some observations that we haven't previously reported. Next, sort of the main body of the report looks at the general threat landscape. First, we sort of start out with looking at general trends in that space, which include adversaries' continued use of dual-use tools, living off the land binaries, and other observations. We also spend quite a bit of time looking specifically at the ransomware threat landscape. Ransomware is a threat that continues to be highly impactful for Cisco customers and entities globally. It's a dynamic threat space that we monitor regularly. And so this section, I'll note, too, does have some information on the most active ransomware groups, according to our data, as well as most affected industries. So definitely look for that. Also, in this part of the paper, we look at commodity loaders. These are threats that are commonly known in the industry as banking Trojans, but they really have developed into threats that are more loaders. They drop other malware. And so those most active loaders that we've looked at are Crackbot, Emotet, Iced ID, and TrickBot. So looking at activity trends throughout the year and significant updates to their TTPs. And then lastly, we have a section on advanced persistent threats. So looking at those more sophisticated adversaries, many of them state-sponsored threats emanating from countries like Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and more. So certainly a comprehensive report and hopefully something in there for all audiences.
Absolutely, yeah, and it is a huge amount of data that you and the team have combed through, which is, I guess, both a blessing and a curse. But for this, we're taking a step back from all of that and being able to talk about things from a year perspective, which is wonderful. So, lastly, Kendall, would you mind providing a summary of the section that we're going to be talking about today, which is dedicated to our work in Ukraine?
Absolutely. So I think the theme of this section and really our work throughout the year as it relates to Ukraine has just been the influx of actors into this threat space. And those actors have had such varying levels of skill and different motivations too. And so this section really takes a look at that at a high level. We give sort of an overview of those threats and actors with many examples of each. But then we also drilled down into the data. We derived so many of our observations from our telemetry and various data sources. So looking at our endpoint telemetry, incident response investigations, and drawing out some common TTPs and activity trends that we saw throughout the year. We also touch on some of our methodologies and our approach to capturing some of this data, including our Ukraine task force, and a new detection system that we created that can identify attacker IPs targeting Ukraine. And lastly, we have some forecasting language on what we expect to see in this space going into 2023.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Kendall. Next up, we have Nick Randolph, malware researcher for Talos. Nick, welcome to this broadcast. Can you talk a bit about your role in helping to protect Ukraine's critical infrastructure?
Sure thing. Thanks, Hazel. My team produces most of the detection content that runs on the Cisco Secure Endpoint product. And in our regular work with Ukrainian customers and all customers, we track how effective those are. And for this exercise, we can kind of focus in on Ukraine. And given the extra detail that other teams have been gathering related to Ukrainian customers, we can provide more specific detection around their enterprises.
Fantastic. And how did you and your team contribute to the review of the year in this report?
Yeah. Most of our contribution to the report itself was in collecting the data around the detections and their effectiveness and researching the cause behind trends and shifts that we see in what we're alerting on and what we're blocking.
Excellent. Thank you, Nick. We'll learn a bit more about the data that you have been looking at in a little bit. In the meantime, I'm going to go over to Vanya Svajcher, one of our threat researchers for Talos. Vanya, could you talk about your role within Talos and your role in protecting Ukraine?
Yes. Hi, Hazel. As far as Talos is concerned, I'm part of the outreach team. EMEA outreach team, we are tasked for looking at those most interesting threats which are worth sharing with a wider audience. So we are kind of external facing team, and we are trying to provide and give good voice for the good work that's done within Talos. And as far as the actual task force or Ukrainian task force is concerned, I was acting, or I'm still acting, as one of the leads in one of the groups in the Talos Threat Hunters team.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So the variety of actors involved in targeting Ukraine has certainly presented a lot of diverse challenges for us, as well as our customers and our partners. And these challenges include responding to ongoing changes in tactics, techniques, and procedures, as Kendall mentioned, as well as new and evolving threats, and of course, the difficulties in attributing activity to specific groups. So can you talk about how Talos has organized ourselves internally to be able to monitor such a diverse set of threat actors?
Yeah, I need to give a shout out to even to the wider Cisco, because the people in Cisco really stepped up to help. We have over 650 people looking at the open source intelligence and providing that intelligence to some of the channels we have internally within Talos. And we also were following the development as they happened from the beginning of the year to the beginning of the actual invasion in February. We quickly realized that there will be, and there is, quite a large or high level of activity in terms of the cyber attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure, critical infrastructure, and government organizations. And so we decided to put together this task force, which is a kind of completely voluntary task force. And we kind of set aside some time for everybody to work on this specific task, which is trying to help our Ukrainian customers and partners to protect their own infrastructure. So the way to do it, of course, it's very difficult because there's so much data coming in from our own product telemetry and from various partners as well. So we had to divide in teams, and a lot of the work has been automated. We have developed various data analytic tools. We have developed various machine learning practices, which will be able to provide us with the most important data, the anomaly data that we then are able to then dig deeper and to track various TTPs, and also work with our partners in Ukraine in trying to remediate the threats as they happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I echo your shouting out to everybody across Cisco who has got involved in that monumental effort. So, Kendall, if I can come to you next. We in the report we outlined the top adversaries and the threats that have been targeting Ukrainian entities and their allies in 2022. Would you be able to summarize these adversaries and the types of threats that they have used in their attacks?
Sure. And with the influx of actors into this space, we've certainly seen a variety of activity. Leading up to and immediately following Russia's invasion, we saw a number of destructive wipers and other malware targeting Ukrainian entities. So viewers may be familiar with some of those big name threats like Whispergate, Hermetic Wiper, and others. Also, at the very start of the war, we saw cyber criminals come into this space very quickly. And this is typical. Cyber criminals are highly opportunistic. They're known to use global events to their advantage that they know have lots of national and international interest. And this case was no different. So we saw them quickly creating email lures, leveraging topics related to the war, such as humanitarian assistance and different types of fundraising, refugees, things like that. A lot of that activity was scam activity, but we did see them dropping some other more serious threats like remote access Trojans. We additionally saw hacktivists delivering some less sophisticated but still impactful threats, such as the group Killnet, which has become pretty well known over the last several months for targeting pro-Ukraine countries with distributed denial of service attacks. And lastly, we certainly saw many different advanced persistent threats, or APTs, including state-sponsored groups in this space. The Russian state-sponsored group Gameradon, for example, has been highly active, distributing information stealing malware and other threats. We even saw an attempted supply chain attack. And one thing to note too is we've seen APTs that are not associated with Russia or Ukraine. We saw, for example, Mustang Panda, a Chinese APT, begin to leverage the war in their operations. So Certainly, it appears as though all types of adversaries have become highly involved and are looking to capitalize on the war to their advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of those details are contained within the report, so be sure to check that out. Nick, from your research, looking at the telemetry on the endpoints, would you be able to summarize the main adversary behavior trends that we've seen are being active within the cyber attacks against Ukraine?
Sure. I think one of the big ones we observed was, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with this, but living off the land or lolbin binaries. There's techniques related to these. They're tools that are already on an endpoint. They're either part of a typical Windows install or some utility that's already present, and attackers can abuse those to gain additional access or information from the endpoint. We were actually able to kind of zoom in on a particular attack or a particular technique, and we saw a pretty serious difference between the way that was the volume of events for that attack across Cisco customers versus Ukrainian customers. That's a subset of customers, but we saw a significant increase there that wasn't as present in the broader customer base.
And how would you say these behavior trends have evolved since the start of the invasion in February?
A large increase. There are a few different visualizations of this in the report that make it really apparent. It's a very significant and obvious increase over, the past 8 to 12 months.
Yep. Yeah, and there's some great charts in the report which talk about how these behavior trends have evolved as well. Just a shout out to our audience who are watching us on LinkedIn Live. We are our wonderful team in the background are monitoring all of your questions and your comments, and we'll address those questions towards the end of the broadcast. So we're saving them up, and we'll ask them on your behalf. Vanya, I wanted to expand on a point that Kendall made earlier about how certain threat actors are very opportunistic and have leveraged the war to their advantage by creating themes and lures, in some cases to deliver malware to victims. Could you talk about what we've seen there from a social engineering angle?
Yes, I think every big event in the history will have some threat actors, and things such as like global pandemics, big events, World Cup. Of course, I don't want to compare some sporting events with the war, but then it's not a surprise that many actors will jump on the same bandwagon and will try to use various social engineering techniques to try to get users to either pay some money or lose money, or for them to earn something, or to install some malicious code onto the target's endpoints or machines. So yes, we have seen over the year quite a large number of various types of actors. So first of all, it's not just all the advanced persistent threats which are targeting and using this to their advantage, but also commodity actors. So you can think of any like a standard information stealer such as Redline or Agent Tesla. They are also using social engineering tricks, and sometimes related to Ukraine. Kendall has mentioned Mustang Panda. This is a Chinese attributed APT that's tried to use information related to the Ukrainian war by targeting European and Western organizations by sending documents that seem to be very legitimate documents, some agreements, some information about the war itself, while in the background, these documents will actually reach out to launch some to download and launch some malicious code with the intent of stealing some and exfiltrating the data to the advantage of the group attacking. In terms of, I think, Kendall, you also mentioned this balancer, which is in fact a real company, but the groups on Telegram have created this specific invite to everybody to download and launch the Liberator denial of service tool to launch denial of service campaign against the actors acting on behalf of Russia, but in fact they would install some information stealers to exfiltrate some data. So there is a definite danger there. And of course we have to go back as well to Russian affiliated APT groups such as Gamma Redon that's persistently using legitimate documents as lures that are related to the target they are targeting. So if they're after military organizations, they will send a document that's taken from some real site, which is really relevant to the target of the attack. And then that's how they get people to open those documents and therefore launch some malicious code in the background.
Great. Thank you for that overview, Vanya. My next question is for all three of you. I'll start with Kendall. And I'd like to ask, from your experience in researching threat actors, I would like to ask you what you would like to call out about the way adversaries have been targeting Ukraine this year. You know, what's notable about the way that they have carried out their attacks since the start of the invasion? Kendall, can I come to you first on that one?
Sure. I think as we think about the influx of actors into this space, for me, one of the most notable observations has been just the variety of creative methods that actors have used to both compromise victims and deploy their threats. And I think there's sort of two examples that help illustrate that a little bit. One is the operation that Vanya was just talking about, in which we saw cyber criminals marketing a tool that they said was essentially to conduct DDoS attacks against Russian targets. However, once users downloaded that onto their systems, it actually infected their computers with malware. And so we saw cyber criminals taking advantage of sort of this novice group of actors looking for a way to become involved in the war. And they may not have been as familiar with conducting cyber offensive operations. And the cyber criminals were quick to capitalize on that, and certainly in a very creative way. And another example I'll add in terms of sort of a creative and well-researched operation had to do with our discovery of an operation involving the GoMet backdoor. This was likely carried out by a sophisticated actor, if not one affiliated with Russia directly, but they were targeting a software company whose software is widely used by organizations in Ukraine. So it certainly appeared to be an attempt at a supply chain attack where if they could compromise this one target, presumably many, many more targets would become compromised as well. So I think the notable thing here is just, again, the variety of the types of infection vectors we've seen, and actors certainly knowing their victims and knowing how to exploit them best.
Thanks, Kendall. Vanya, how about you? What would you like to call out about the way adversaries have targeted Ukraine?
Yes, certainly the variety that Kendall mentioned is quite important. But I would also like to point out that there was really nothing out of the ordinary, which is somewhat suspicious in itself. We've seen actors sending malicious documents. We have seen them trying to exploit vulnerabilities. We have seen them trying to brute force passwords. But really, perhaps we expected more of the unknown unknowns, if you wish, the completely new types of attacks that would perhaps be super devastating. But overall, the actual impact of cyber attacks, even if they're really active, has been way smaller than the actual impact of the kinetic attacks.
Yeah, absolutely. And that speaks to the capabilities of the defense programs as well, and how they've been built up over the years. Nick, anything that you would like to add to that?
Sure. I definitely agree with Vanya and Kendall. There's been, we see the same types of attacks that we see across other enterprises. It's just the volume of events and the pace of these attacks has really increased in this subset of customers versus the broader customer base.
Yeah, absolutely. Vanya, I'd like to talk to you about some of the threat actor infighting that we've seen. So in addition to shifting adversaries' attention away from traditional targets, the war has also caused conflict and infighting within different threat groups. And, you know, there's so many threat actors that are actually intertwined into this conflict in some way or another. So as an example, following Conti's public declaration of support for Russia, a disgruntled affiliate leaked the ransomware group's playbook that contained valuable operational information. That's one example. I was wondering, Vanya, if you can talk about what we've seen, you know, in that adversary infighting space.
Yes, I think as you mentioned really well, Conti was probably the most well-known and most well-documented example where one of the members of the team was a member who supported Ukraine and disagreed with Conti's public support for the Russian invasion. And at the beginning of the conflict, we've seen many, mostly hacktivist groups taking one side or the other side in the conflict, while the ones that were supporting Russia would be publicly on the social networks, would declaring their support for the operation, while some other ones, mostly the more international, let's say, ones, while the ones supporting Russia will be localized mostly in Russia and some of the countries that allied with Russia, such as Belarus. Groups such as Killnet that Kendall already mentioned, obviously was supporting Russia. There were some Belarus state-sponsored similarly kind of groups. And then on the other side, we had like some very well-known hacktivist groups such as Anonymous or IT Army of Ukraine, who started to conduct operation on behalf or supporting the goals to protect and also attack Russian supporting sites and Russian supporting infrastructure.
Great, thank you for that overview. Nick, I'll come to you next. When the invasion started and we were surging our efforts to protect Ukrainian organizations from cyber attacks, we developed several new custom detection systems and signatures to help us better identify suspicious activity and potentially targeted attacks. I was wondering if you could talk more about those custom signatures and what they found.
Yeah. We collect a pretty broad set of telemetry on all of the endpoints that we provide coverage for. And the threat intelligence and threat research teams can ask that we create a signature that customers don't actually see, but allow us to collect kind of a broader picture of the behavior on an endpoint or a set of endpoints. With that broader picture, we can then go back and create detection for the specific threat actor activities. And this works kind of two ways. In addition to our research into the malware itself, we can provide hunting signatures on our own and use this to collect samples, additional TTPs, additional IOCs, a lot of extra data that's very valuable in tracking these threat actors.
Yeah, absolutely. Kendall, an interesting thing, our incident responders, they observed fewer threats affecting Cisco customers in the first half of 2022. So threats like ransomware, information stealers, commodity malware, and the exploitation of known vulnerabilities, they were all notably lower between February and June, which corresponds to the early months of the war. And then the volume of Cisco Talos incident response observed threats returned to near normal numbers around July. I was wondering, could you talk about that and whether we have any indications on why that might be?
Sure. Yeah, you're right. And this was a very interesting observation. And of course, there's no way to know exactly a direct cause for this, but our best guess, based on all the information we have, is that adversaries were refocused, that they redirected their attention on Ukraine and Russia. Our telemetry has shown that the threat activity directed at Ukrainian entities has pretty much remained consistently high throughout the duration of the war. There's been a couple upticks over certain months, but generally it's been high. And so I think that, combined with the reduced number of observed threats from an IR perspective, certainly reinforces the notion that threat actors have been focused in this arena. And so adversaries who may have typically been targeting certain industries or other parts of the world probably refocus their efforts to the Russia-Ukraine arena once the war started.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's further discussion on that topic in the new Beers with Talos podcast, which dropped today. There's a great discussion between David Liebenberg and Matt Only about what was going on and during that space. Now, Kendall, if I can come back to you for my next question. Based on our telemetry, the task unit and their findings, the threat hunting discoveries, what is your assessment with regards to the cybersecurity threat to Ukraine, as well as allied government and private sector entities going into 2023?
Sure. So a couple things. I think first and foremost, our telemetry and task force findings show no signs that the volume of activity is slowing down. And it's something Vanya and Nick have touched on as well. But we fully expect that these types of attacks will persist well into 2023. And even if there's a cessation of hostilities on the battlefield, we expect that adversaries will remain active in this space. Cyber criminals, for one, have no time clock on their operations, meaning that they're going to continue to use lures in their operations as long as they remain effective. So potentially even long after a global event has ended. And APTs, particularly Russian APTs and others, have used cyber operations as a key way to project power and achieve geopolitical goals. And so we should not count those actors out as well. And lastly, I'll note that we would expect to see probably some more destructive malware deployed. It's certainly a hallmark of Russian APT activity. So that also remains a possibility as well.
Thanks, Kendall. Vanya, same question to you. I know that you've observed the threats against Ukraine over many years, going back many years. Could you talk about your assessment going into 2023 and maybe a little bit of a history about cyber attacks against Ukraine?
Yeah, I think, Kendall, you raised a really good point that even if the hostilities stop and the war is ended, we will definitely not expect to see any smaller amount of the activities of various actors. In fact, maybe they will even increase. And we know that because we were present in Ukraine since the annexation of Crimean Peninsula. And we were working with the partners in Ukraine on processing all the major incidents that we know about, from the kind of the 2015 attack on the energy grid with Black Energy malware, where the attackers have been able to get into one of the electricity providers, and as a consequence, hundreds of thousands of homes were left without electricity for some time. Then a year later, there was another attack, which we were not 100% sure whether they used in-destroyer malware, but this is which was discovered about December 2016. This was a more sophisticated piece of malware, which understood all of the protocols which are used in the usual industrial control systems which control the power grid. Quite a sophisticated piece of malware. And in fact, this year we have seen and mentioned in-destroyer 2, which has a somewhat more limited in scope, but it's obviously targeted to the same task, which is to try to bring the energy grid down as much as possible. We've been in Ukraine, and we, of course, one of the biggest ever attacks with NotPetya destructive malware, which seemed it was a ransomware in 2017. Then, of course, we need to mention the VPN filter in 2018. Its successor was discovered and disclosed this year, Cyclops Links. So over the years, we have seen a lot of quite innovative I would say, attacks on the grounds of Ukraine. And so we really expected this year to continue with the same trend. And in 2023, it's very unlikely it will slow down.
Yeah. Thanks, Vanya. This is the last question from me before I turn to our audience questions. So if you have a question for our panelists, please do submit those into the comments section of the channel that you are watching us on. Vanya, back to you. Bearing in mind your combined efforts in helping to protect critical infrastructure in a nation struck by war, would you be able to share your guidance, your advice to any security defenders who are watching on how to protect critical infrastructure from sophisticated threat actors?
Yeah, I think for me it would be very difficult to give the advice to people who are really fighting on the grounds in Ukraine, because they're really doing a great job in protecting their own infrastructure. But I think people in other places can learn a lot from following what's going on in Ukraine. I think people should be very much aware that this is not going to stop, and they may very easily become the targets of the similar groups. Therefore, there are some, like a typical thing they from what we looked at is, for example, they need to be very much aware of the hardware and software they have on their networks. So when the new piece of software is being run, they can investigate it, and there are some products, including Cisco Secure Endpoint, that can give you this metrics as well. I think things such as multi-factor authentications are very important. Things such as keeping your software and hardware up to date with the security patches. Things that you would usually use to protect your infrastructure, only be even more reactive, even more vigilant when it comes to participating or being part of a cyber or a real conflict or war.
Thanks, Vanya. Nick, from your perspective, any advice for security defenders?
Yeah. Before my time with Cisco Talos, I worked in incident response and defense. It's really important to have an incident response plan or a template before the incident occurs. Have some idea what the steps that you want to take once you've identified an incident, know where your logs are, how to search through them for the activity you're looking for. And the Talos Incident Response Group recently published a white paper going over some of their kind of top 10 items for incident response. It's an excellent resource.
It is. It absolutely is. Okay, so now it's time for questions from our audience. Still time to get them in, so do submit those in the comments section. I'm just going to have a look at what we've had. Question for Vanya, I think this one first of all. How do you think the cyber attacks against Ukraine have affected other countries?
Yeah, I touched on this question a little bit in my kind of conclusion to the Ukrainian report. And of course, I think there's a good example, for example, in Mustang Panda, which is not an advanced persistent threat actor that's usually associated with Russia. It's associated with China. And of course, they took advantage of the situation in Ukraine and the war, and the fact that everybody in the Western world is also very interested in what's going on. So they use that to create specific lures to obtain access to some of the systems and to try to execute their own goals. And I don't think this activity will stop. I think we will see other actors trying to piggyback on this whole unfortunate war in Ukraine. So yes, all the other countries can also be affected if the war, hopefully it won't, but it can also spread to other countries.
Thanks, Vanya. Another question that we've had in, Nick, I think someone is very interested in how we create those custom detection signatures and systems. Would you be able to expand on that? I'm going to ask you to talk more about the custom detection systems that we built.
Sure. So you can think of it as casting kind of a wider net for more information. We'll end up catching things that aren't malicious or maybe not even suspicious, but within that set of data, we'll have more information about what maybe a threat actor is doing prior to the things we already have alerts for. And then we can build models to kind of predict behavior based on the information we collect through those more broad custom detections. They may not be at a signal to noise ratio that really makes them useful for incident responders in a customer's environment, but for us, we can use it to collect a lot more data.
Great, thanks, Nick. Yeah, and one of the reasons for creating this report is to show the security community and people who are interested more about how we do these things and the data, what we do with the data. So be sure to check out the report for more details on those custom detection systems. Kendall, I think I'm going to throw this one to you. What was your process in sifting through all of the data for this report? How did you start?
Yeah, it was a massive undertaking, as you can imagine. So my team sort of started with some ideas about what we thought were key events and observations. But then we really went to our subject matter expertise analysts and looking at the data. And so huge shout out to really the entire Talos organization helped contribute to this report. We met with probably over 30 subject matter experts, and it was really a combination of us going to them, asking lots of questions, and then them coming back to us saying, well, this is what the data told us. And so we really let the data drive the narrative in this report, which I think is really important to note. But beyond that, we relied on our experts to sort of pull the telemetry and create various different graphics showing the trends over time. And then it was up to our team to sort of put that in narrative form, provide some analysis, and pull out the key points. So certainly, a monumental undertaking and a team effort for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And this report really is a testament to how diverse the Cisco Talos team is and how people's skill sets and expertise came together to create this data-rich report, which is a wonderful story of our work in 2022. That's all the live questions that I'm seeing. If you're watching us later or on demand, please do still put your questions in and we'll answer those at another time. And yes, please do grab your copy of the Talos 2022 Year in Review report and share it with anyone that you think would benefit from this fantastic resource. So it is available now, and it is blog.talosintelligence.com/year-in-review. Thanks again to the tremendous team effort that it took to bring this report to life. My thanks also to Kendall, to Nick, and to Vanya for joining me today. After this, be sure to listen to the new Beers with Talos podcast featuring David Liebenberg, who also led the charge on this report, and that is available on that same link or in all your favorite podcast platforms. Come for the report discussion, but stay for the 20 minutes of Ranksgiving. And if you thought that involves ranking Thanksgiving foods by awesomeness, you would be correct. Join us again in January when we'll have another broadcast featuring our experts who have been heavily involved in the second section of the report, and that is the continuing impact of Log4j. For now, we hope that you enjoy the read, and thanks again for watching.